As the international response to COVID-19 continues to develop, individuals, families, and the entrepreneurial high net worth are facing significant challenges to which they need to respond rapidly, but wisely. I'm Andrea Satiri. I'm the Global Head of Tax at Baker Tilly International. As we talk about how COVID-19 has changed cross-border planning for the private high net worth, I welcome international private high net worth specialists Nigel May from our UK member firm, Ian Halligan from our US member firm, and Alison Wood from our member firm in Australia, who have all been working closely with their private high net worth clients to help them through this challenging time. Some of the things they're going to highlight will stress the needs to be thoughtful about the decisions which result in where you choose to continue to play out COVID. There are several challenges, and they will lay out some of the key issues to consider and the war stories they've dealt with over the last 12 months. With flights grounded and borders closed, turning to Alison first, what are the scenarios you've been dealing with clients in Australia who have been unable to travel or are stranded at home?
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, yeah, well, we certainly made the best of our island status. So we sort of navigated the initial medical issues when it came to COVID quite well initially. And there was a lot of ATO guidance, particularly up to 30th of June 2020, that gave people reassurance. People were stuck in the wrong place. One of the main issues was, am I going to inadvertently create a permanent establishment for my entity and drag it into the Australian tax net if I'm physically here, because our Prime Minister asked Aussies to come home. Now we're seeing it's changed slightly. We're still unable to travel without a permit. I saw a client yesterday who's had 4 tickets, but he can't get his exit permit to actually leave the country, which some people are finding sad and challenging. But that means that we haven't had the foresight to be able to plan as we would have done normally. And we're having to study and consider residency statuses much more frequently than we perhaps had before. And I think sometimes looking at a lot of the cross-border issues and having practiced and help people in all 3 jurisdictions that we're talking today, we fall into a self reassurance in the fact that we all speak English. The rules are similar, but they are subtly so very, very different. So maybe Nigel can comment on some of the things he's seeing.
That's a good comment, Alison. We share a language. Well, we sort of share a language sometimes, but the rules. I think one of the fundamental mistakes that people make is assuming that the rules that apply in one country will be the same as apply in the other, and it's that sort of fundamental mistake that you see people tumbling over. And the point you've made, Alison, is people have not had the freedom of movement that we have traditionally had, and that impacts on residency to a very great extent. Ian, from a US viewpoint, of course, if you're a US citizen, you're caught anyway. But you must have had people sort of locked down in the US who are becoming increasingly chums of the IRS.
Yeah, it's a difficult time for everybody, right? The uncertainty is there anyway, and then we've here in the States we've had COVID, we've had the election, which just creates all these additional layers of what's going to happen with the tax law, and is anyone going to get caught by these residency rules? The US has obviously got the state issue as well. We can have state residency doesn't necessarily mirror federal residency, so again, like Alison said, the permanent establishment issue for the corporations that the individuals are here working for in the United States, if you create that corporate tax nexus, there's been some guidance issued, but it hasn't gone as far as we would like. I mean, it never does. So you're sort of trying to hit a moving target at all times. And as we get deeper and deeper into this pandemic, or as we come out of this pandemic, people are stranded in places. And yeah, can they have triggered residency accidentally? Can that lead to additional tax liabilities here in the States for them, for their family, for their corporations? Of course. So it's a challenging time. We've certainly seen some people in inadvertent situations that they wish they hadn't got caught up in. But you can only go with the facts you're given and sort of try and sift through it and get the best answers you can. But yeah, it's not ideal.
If we can,
I just wonder whether this is going to be the tax version of long pandemic, from a viewpoint that these issues are going to emerge over the next few years when the facts emerge as to what people have done and where they've been, and the tax consequences follow. Alison, you mentioned about the ATO having been good with their guidance to start with. From an HMRC viewpoint, I would say that we've been really, the UK has been very poor. I'm going to say the UK has been poor in not really giving people who are locked down in the UK guidance as to what the consequences are, or rather mitigation to those consequences.
I mean, we do have because our rules aren't quite perhaps as prescribed as those in the US and the UK for residency, because we use more of a resides test. We perhaps have a little bit more flexibility in how we interpret those rules, and it's definitely on a case-by-case basis. But one of the things that is hitting them, and to Ian's point about state taxes, we don't have a state tax system per se, but we do have this foreign person, this extra surcharge when it comes to owning property here. And we've had some, permanent residents owning property here, intending to come here, can't get here, and have been caught by quite significant land tax surcharges and stamp duty surcharges when they've already sort of set in motion the purchase of property. And they're real backdoor ones, and they are the ones that really do upset people, I think, as much as anything else. So that it's not just the income tax implications or the capital gains tax implications. I think there are all these other sort of state and stamp duty type considerations as well that sometimes you forget when you're just talking about residency.
can we deep dive into some of these specific examples that you've been dealing with? So Nigel, if I can come to you first, are there some really particularly prickly cases you've seen from a UK perspective, of either people that are stranded here or people that would ordinarily be here but are stranded overseas, that you can talk us through, and maybe explain some of the advice you've been given in that context as well?
So the major issue that we've got, we have what's called, or is referred to colloquially in tax terms as the boomerang rule. But we have the concept of domicile, and domicile is really very important. And individuals who were born in the UK with a UK domicile of origin, where they have been expats and have established a non-UK domicile of choice, they immediately regain UK domicile by becoming UK resident. And I've certainly encountered instances where individuals who've been based in the Caribbean, Australia, elsewhere, who have found themselves almost definitively UK resident for the tax year to 5th April 2021, that have, unless there is some mitigation given, found themselves within the UK inheritance tax net, where their non-domicile status should have given them significant protection. And that's quite scary. And there's no get out of jail card at the moment.
Absolutely. And
Yeah,
Ian, you've seen similar things.
Yeah, in the US, it's really mostly an inbound issue. As Nigel sort of said before, US citizens and green card holders are taxed in the States whether they live here or not. So, we have a substantial presence test, like a day's counting test for income tax residents, which, there are exceptions for certain scenarios, but there's a lot of people who are having to monitor their days in the US to establish whether they have become a US tax resident. And if you inadvertently trip over that, then all of a sudden you're subject to US tax on your worldwide income, which, in certain scenarios can have devastating effects. So, some of it is, monitoring the days, but as, as we've said, with the travel restrictions and things like that, it's not just as easy as, hey, monitor the days and stay out of the US for X period of time to avoid the residency. It's not quite as simple as that. So this kind of goes beyond the tax situation. I mean, that's the one we're trying to manage, but there's other things in play here, which, you know, there's all these levers pulling in different directions. It makes it very difficult.
Yeah, I'd concur with that, Ian, because you know, one of my clients, you know, six months ago, we've been planning for a transaction. She'd been planning to leave the country because it was quite important from an Australian perspective that she wasn't resident here when the transaction went through. And everything was going according to plan, and then COVID hit, and it wasn't just buying a ticket to get out of the country became a challenge when flights and things closed down, but she also needed an exit permit, and we couldn't guarantee that she would actually get an exit permit to be able to leave the country. And having those sorts of conversations is very different from us from a tax perspective. We're used to sort of sitting down and going through legislation, and a lot of the legislation in all three countries, or the guidelines have all been a bit on the fly, shall we say? You know, not as well thought through, perhaps as they could be, and those sorts of things can be really frustrating. I've taken calls from HR directors because, you know, clients have had jobs, they've got assignments waiting for them in various locations, they brought tickets for them, but they didn't get off on the other end, and that's because they couldn't get through the departure gate because they've got no exit permit, and that's been quite challenging and confusing for people.
Yeah, it's you know, it's a good point you bring up, Alison, because we've got, again, with those citizens and green card holders, we've got foreign nationals here in the US who've been here a while, who do have a green card, who do have citizenship, who, when the pandemic broke, they wanted to go back to their home country because of, you know, family reasons. So they wanted to leave the US and give up the citizenship and the green card. Well, in most cases, to do that, you need an appointment with the consulate, and those are not easy to get right now. You know, even if you wanted to, you know, to give it up and to go back and to break US tax residence in those situations, it's not just a case of waving the magic wand and it happens. There's a step process to it, and that step process isn't happening as quickly as any of us would like.
Right,
But
yeah.
one of the geographical things that's quite interesting, of course, from a European construct, we've obviously got so many different sovereign states within a small geographical area, and it's relatively common to encounter individuals who have found themselves locked down. I'm from a UK. France is the greatest and easiest example, but there will be that's viewing it from a UK viewpoint, but goodness knows how many other connotations there are to this, of individuals who are residing in one European state and have found themselves locked down in another European state because it's such a constrained geographical area as compared to, say, to Australia or the US, with so many different jurisdictions. And I come back to the long COVID example. There are going to be all sorts of connotations to this that will take an awfully long time to come out.
Absolutely. And I think what I'm hearing through what all of you are saying is that so much of people's behaviors through the last 12 months has been very reactive. And I guess a byproduct of that is that the advice that you have to give is also very reactive as well. But to what extent have you been able to give advice that has been more forward-looking, more proactive? Is there anything you can do for people? Is there advice that you can give that enables them to have a little bit of security over, I guess, the next 12 months or a longer period in time?
Yeah, it's always difficult, Andrew, because we're trying to, you know, you're trying to play out scenarios over a short to medium term perspective, certainly when it comes to residents, selling companies like Alison said, and things of that nature. So some of it is crystal ball gazing on behalf of the client. Some of it is ours. You know, we can only give the clients the advice that we know today based on the rules that we know today, and sort of play out scenarios depending on what we think might happen with the tax law, with the residency rules, or, you know, the interaction between the countries that we're talking about. But yeah, I mean, we're all, as advisors, looking for some sort of certainty. We're all, as clients, looking for some sort of certainty. And we have less of it today than we certainly did 12, 18 months ago. But you know, that doesn't mean you give up. I think it's just a case of make sure you're communicating with your clients as much as possible. All these little tweaks and all these little articles we see, and potential changes in lane that governments are taking, that we're alerting people to the extent that it impacts them or is going to impact them, and go from there.
Do you think, Ian, the point is make sure that the questions are asked? So you know, it's a two-way process, isn't it? We can beg of our clients what their plans are, but making sure that what people are trying to achieve, and you know what they are looking to do over the next, what have they been frustrated by, what have they not been able to do, what do they want to do, making sure that those questions are asked, so that proper consideration can be given. Is that not? I'm certainly, from a UK viewpoint, that's what I'm begging of my client base.
And,
Yeah,
it's the same from the Australian perspective, Nigel. I think that, I see our role is to helping clients make informed choices as far as possible. And those choices sort of do tend to change with things outside our control at the moment. But where I have been able to plan much more effectively is I'm seeing Aussies who've been away 15, 20, 25 years coming home and wanting to come home. And we have been able to give that the right sort of planning. I've always said that, if you're coming to Australia, particularly as a permanent resident or citizen, we need sort of 6 to 9 months planning before you fall into we have a high rate of tax at 47%. It kicks in early. There's lots of these other foreign person and other sorts of things when it comes to buying property. And rarely do I get the full 6 to 9 months. But COVID, on a positive side, COVID has sort of given me that, because people can't actually get here quite as quickly as they want to. So they may be physically frustrated, but at least I do have a bit more time to do that planning, so they can sort of restructure their personal affairs and their investments and other sorts of things before they drag everything inadvertently into the tax net. And I'm having a difficult conversation about how something's been taxed here when it wouldn't have been taxed in the UK, for example.
Do you not think, Alison, though, the scary thing about this is at some stage, hopefully soon, the floodgates will open and we'll be free to travel, and people will be doing things without advice?
I'd hope. I think I think it's made people stop and think. And the one good thing is that, we're now having this Zoom call with over 3 major jurisdictions. We wouldn't have done that before, not in the same sort of timely way. I think people are a little bit more cognizant of the subtle differences, and I think, people don't just automatically think, oh, well, I pay tax on my worldwide income in the UK. Going to Australia is not going to cause me an issue because it's the Commonwealth. So it'll all be okay, or vice versa. So I think, COVID has sort of helped educate people, and people have had a bit more time to sort of Google, for want of a better description.
Absolutely.
I hope so. The cynic in me thinks that Nigel might be onto something, but I hope so.
No, hope springs eternal.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'm looking on the bright side of things, boys.
That's probably the best way to look at Alison.
Alison, Nigel, Ian, it's been really great getting your minds together today to share some thoughts on how COVID has changed cross-border planning for the private high net worth. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. Thank you very much.